Sharp chat. Sharp chat. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. Once upon a time, once upon a time, sweet loving, my sweet loving, come and cuddle up a little closer, my little loving mine, my
So here in just a few short years, you now have 2 gold medals. You have sung with 2 historically great quartets. Keepsake, in some respects, one of those era-changing quartets that had such an impact on so many barbershoppers like myself. What motivated you to want to compete again in another quartet?
There was a couple of different factors, meaning there's probably been 7 or 8 guys, sorry to make the list that big, but Tony DeRosa is one of, I'm an only child like you had mentioned before. He's definitely one of those brothers I never had. So, meaning I love Tony DeRosa, man. He's awesome. I know everyone does, but I loved him first. I'm just putting it out there. So in a cool way, him and I, he was like my brother, and we wanted to continue to advance and get better and push each other. So looking back on it, I was very fortunate that he was patient to hang with me and allow me the role of the lead slot. But no, we definitely, when Keepsake was continuing on without Don Barnick, again, because of the job relocation up to North Carolina, and we didn't think we could keep it sharp at the time of rehearsing weekly. So we, again, similarly had over 30 shows still on the books that we wanted to try to fulfill. Don wasn't going to be able to do them. So Jeff Oxley and Gary Lewis were the 2 awesome fill-in basses for Keepsake. So Gary was on our radar in a great way, and him and Tony became best buds, working together at Disney. Right. So in that aspect of it, it was all that glue because he was singing bass with Keepsake. And then my initial mindset to Tony and Gary was, well, if Keepsake can't continue, no disrespect to Gary and Jeff, we just want to fulfill our shows. We don't want to move on without Don.
Right,
we just fulfill obligations. I was like, so why don't we look for a killer tenor? And, the 3 of us just get a killer tenor. And right when I mentioned that in a cool way, Tony and Gary were like, no, man, we're going to get Gary to sing tenor. And we got this monster bass here at Disney. So it sort of segued from Gary, I envisioned as being our next bass for Tony and I, and we'd get some stud tenor. Right. And move forward. They convinced me that I got to meet the one and only Kevin Miles. And of course, after I met him and heard him, of course, how could not anyone want to sing with Kevin? He's a sweetheart and a monster talent.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So Platinum forms. You're going into your 99 debut international contest. Your primary competition is going to be a quartet called Fred, which has been great in comedy, but if they're ever going to win, they're going to have to learn to sing better. So they're going to need to find someone who can be a great singing coach for them. And their singing coach that they turn to as the man who can get them over the top happens to be Joe Connelly. Now, this is the thing about barbershop that I think I love just about as much as anything else. You can't imagine that Rex Ryan would have ever asked any other head coach, like the head coach of the Patriots, to come and coach him. I'd love for you to just talk to our audience a little bit about what it's like in the barbershop world to coach your main competition.
It was, I mean, that specifically was huge. That relationship and competitive relationship. Of course, we had the great relationship with Clay Hine. I was been a long time Hine family, just love the Hines. So that aspect of it too. Clay was our like stud arranger. He was the guy that we had in our hip pocket in a cool way when Keepsake was firing up, and I knew of him with his Killer Family Quartet with his father Tom, and of course Tim and the late great Jed Brooks. Jed was one of my favorites. So in the Atlanta Forum. So we already had a cool relationship with Clay, and then Fred was ramping up basically the same time that Keepsake was. So from the beginning, 1991 was Fred's first international in Louisville, which was Keepsake's first international also. I was coaching in them since then in a cool way, since the beginning, as it were, in a fun way. So just back then, and I mean, it's still the same as far as I know, although I've not competed recently, that aspect of all of us doing whatever we can to help the other guy, meaning I learned that early on from all of my great teachers. Jim Miller was huge about that. You wouldn't think arguably the most competitive barbershopper in the history of the sport was unbelievable at coaching his most scary, fierce competitors, because his comment to me was, yeah, man, I want to help them be better than they've ever been and hope that my best is better than their best. That was always his mindset. Yeah. So, no, I mean, that's always been the mindset of barbershoppers, anybody I've ever come around. So, no, there was no other option. Obviously, even though Platinum was hoping that we could top Fred and Michigan Jake and all the other stunning quartets, we knew that they were going to be fierce and they would go for anything to pull it off. They did. They were awesome.
Yeah. So then between 99 and 2000, was there anything that fundamentally had to change with Platinum to then go on to win by a breathtaking margin of victory?
Respectfully, it was just getting to know each other better. I think we all grew and blossomed as singers and musicians in that next year, and we continued to work. We had tons of show weekend opportunities. When you're on top of your game and you can stay healthy, nothing beats that live performance setting, as you know better than anyone. So being able to be out in front of totally different audiences and totally different settings just helped you be more well-rounded and bulletproof in a fun way when we get on that stage. And another Jim Miller line, when everyone sinks to their lowest level of proficiency, and just hoping that your lowest level of proficiency is better than anyone else's.
That's great. Now, on the one hand, for us as barbershoppers, we were disappointed that Platinum was not going to have a longer history in active performance than you did. But on the other hand, that opened up an opportunity to do something that I would imagine had to be a great thrill for you, and that is to compete on the international stage in a quartet with your dad. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, and another one of my brothers from another mother, if you will, Art Adams, our bass singer, Dr. Art Adams is also.
Sure.
So that whole story, we could do another webinar just on that, Shane, at a later time. But still one of my very best buds and like a brother I never had. And his sheer determination when he first learned about our style of music, growing up in a medical family of nothing, his parents, brother and sister, all of them are doctors. So just growing up with medicine and no music, if you will, he was like a kid in a candy store, and that's saying something because he's a pretty tall drink of water. So he just loved the style. And in a cool way, like you had mentioned earlier, he had that Keepsake experience early on at a Clemson University HEP school in the Dixie district at the time. We were the guest quartet. So that was his first up close experience with a decent quartet. And he followed Don Barnick around like a puppy dog because Don was this monster bass. So it just sort of started from there. He became one of my best friends quickly, and then started traveling to Knoxville, Tennessee, his home, 7 or 8 times a year, just helping him try to get better at the craft and learn everything he could. So no, it was a huge honor to be able to sing with my dad and Art and Jim Pfeiffer in that quartet. It was pretty stunning when we made it to the international stage, beyond all of our dreams.
Yeah, no, I think that's just fantastic. And I know one of the things that really just emerges from what you've already said today that I think is so important for us all to consider. I've always been impressed just watching you as a world-class singer, be willing to sing in quartets with people you just love and want to be with. But the other thing is hearing you talk about your willingness to listen to other people who don't have the medals and the barbershop pedigree that you do, but they have something you can learn from them. And I think that one of the ways to become a four-time international champion is to be humble enough to know what you can get from other people and not feel like you've got all the answers. It's just something that really has overwhelmed me just listening to you talk a little bit about your story in barbershop.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And again, it's all of my role models, Shane. You know, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us.
That's
so
right.
We never would have had this opportunity if this wasn't one of the original American art forms. So I'm so lucky that my dad found it before I was born. So it has been a part of my entire life. I'm a 43-year member of the Barbershop Harmony Society and have been very fortunate to follow my father's footsteps.
That's great. I'm curious, Joe, having accomplished so much, tell us a little bit about what led you to want to do at least one more. I don't know, you may have a lot more left in you, but at least one more, highly competitive quartet in old school. How did that come about?
That was more in a cool way because of the style evolving, and we were allowing more music on the contest stage, a broader umbrella of style, if you will. And we noticed that because so many were so excited about some of the new opportunities as the style was developing and broadening, for lack of a better description, that the classic style wasn't as prevalent. So it was like I was sitting next to Jack Pinto at the 2006 International saying, hey man, there's a lot of stunning high-level new barbershop here, but now we're not seeing quite as much of the classics, which the majority of the audience at that time had gotten hooked on in the first place.
Right.
So it really did come initially about not really making a statement, but more about like, hey, let's see if we can stand out in this evolving crowd of just singing what people have sung in the past. It's nothing really new and exciting, although, a tweak here or there, but it's just preserving some of the classics that now seem to be a bit more classic because of the developing style. And in a cool way, it hit. So I'll remember that debut in Nashville in 2008 in our opening round. Like, it was, you envision in advance, as you know, Shane, positive outcomes until someone tells you otherwise. So it was envisioning how that would go over with that audience. And that experience with Jack Pinto, Joe Cronus, and Rick Taylor was unbelievable. I'll never forget that experience of our first round in Nashville in 2008. It was mighty awesome. One of my favorites.
When you all did Last Night Was the End of the World, it's just one of those moments where the house has such a sense of hushed quiet. You just feel the electricity in the air of what is about to happen. Truly a magical moment. And I wanted to ask you, as someone who, depending on how you want to calculate the era, you've actually won 4 championships in 4 different decades. So you've seen the style evolve quite a bit. I would love to get your appraisal of, on the one hand, what are some of the things that you think have not been for the betterment of barbershop in the way it's evolved, but on the other hand, what would be some positives you think as the style has evolved?
Well, starting with the positives, our level of play now of singing and performance is at an all-time high. It's just magnificent hearing our very best groups, meaning quartets and choruses, men and women. But that level of play to me is the most appealing, how the style has really advanced to almost a professional level of play, if you will. Now, that being said, because I joined back in 1978, there's been a lot of updates to the style, as you just mentioned, when I first came on the scene. So back when I joined initially, it seemed like the common man, if you will, in the style. So refreshing your memory on data, Shane, that first international I went to in 78 had over 11,000 attendees in the audience. And we had just over 40,000 members in the Barbershop Harmony Society at that time. So that aspect of play and all those people involved too was a huge part of it. Excuse me, need to hydrate?
Sure, yeah, no problem. I think that
So
one of the
go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the things that you're getting at, which I do think is a concern for a lot of us, is as much as we love these virtuosic, if that's a word, performances, I do worry sometimes that we're creating an environment in which fewer and fewer people will get greater and greater enjoyment out of this music.
And I totally agree. So that aspect of it, respectfully, when the style was developing and we were changing categories, there were a few that wanted to broaden the style. Respectfully, had grown bored with the current confinements, their words, of the style, and wanted there to be more opportunity. To me, in my history, the very best arrangers, male and female, have always found clever, creative ways to come up with ear candy progressions within the style. Some of our most talented people got bored with the style and wanted to broaden it up so they would have a bigger palette and be able to have a broader canvas to explore with. So back in the day when I joined, bringing back up the 1980 international champion Boston Common, they sang pretty straightforward material that even though none of us could do it nearly as good as Kent, Rich, Larry, or Terry, we all thought we could.
That's right.
Music was pretty straightforward and simple. So the common man barbershopper, although we never could do it as good as the Boston Common, thought, you know what? I can sing from the first hello to the last goodbye.
Right.
I can do great songs like that. So it was more of a common man sport, if you will. And now it's become, because of the style, it's almost an arranging duel. We have these monster talented arrangers that are, in a fun way, are trying to outdo each other. So now it's become a style where only the nearly professional can really hit it out of the park, in my mind. Now, when that happens, it's one of my most favorite things to experience, but that's limited because the style has become so high up, if you will. So again, it was an original American art form. So yes, everything develops, but jazz and others are still around. They've survived. So maybe there's something to be said that it needs to be a bit more of a common man sport more now than ever before.
I often heard the late Jim Miller say that barbershop is blue collar show business. And I think that's a great way to describe what you just said. Now, in addition to being a fantastic performer and a coach, you were also an amazing director. And you've done all of those things in terms of coaching and directing in the world of Sweet Adelines as well as barbershop. And I just love to hear from your point of view, what are some of the things that you really enjoy about working in the Sweet Adeline environment?
Yeah, in a cool way. Of course, growing up in it with the highest level of play, Gem City and Sounds of Music, it was the thing that I've noticed, although I've met some unbelievably committed male barbershoppers, for the most part, the walk of life that the women have to go through, they have to sacrifice a bit more than we do as guys. So making sure everything is lined up in advance for them to be a part of stunning choruses. So for the most part, I find that Sweet Adelines are more committed and a bit more disciplined, and they have to make more sacrifices to hit it out of the park because of, well, obvious reasons. So in a cool way, I've really been blessed to surround myself with some of the most talented people on the globe, and 9 times out of 10, the more and more I realize they end up being women. So women are so talented and smart, just like I did in my quartet settings. I always try to surround myself with smarter, more talented people than myself to push me and drive me and inspire me along the way. So directing has been unbelievably humbling. It's not nearly as easy as being a one-trick pony lead singer. So it's neat because it's about the team sport, as you know better than anyone, Dane.
Yeah.
Whether it's just 4 parts, meaning just 4 people involved, or a chorus of 160, it's just that team atmosphere and that team relationship and camaraderie and building makes the music and harmony life-changing, as you know.
That's great.
It's the best drug on the planet, and I know.
That's great. Now, I have one last question for you. There is a cheeky part of me that wants to ask if there was a 4 quartet tournament, winner takes all, interstate rivals, keepsake, platinum, and old school, who would win? But that's not fair. But here's what I would love to just hear, a quick sort of immediate gut check reflex from you. What would you say going into a theoretical tournament like that? What would be the strength of each of those quartets?
It would depend on the draw. Who's singing first, second, third, or fourth?
Right. I'm not sure. Let's do chronological order.
There's so many factors because it is about the strategy of competition.
Right.
That would be a tough one to call. Meaning, if you look at all four of the quartets on their best day, I'd have to leave that up to the public. So I've had some exceptional moments in all four of those quartets that are unparalleled by the other three. I know that sounds like a cop-out.
Not at all.
Switzerland, I apologize. But it is. I think there's aspects of all four of those quartets when we've been at our best. That was an aspect that was my favorite aspect of the sport. So they all deliver in different ways, if you will.
That's great. Well, Joe, we could talk to you. The time has just blown by. We could talk to you for another hour. I just can't thank you for not only the gracious time you've spent with us today, but for all of the years of just amazing performances, amazing coaching sessions, just all of the time and encouragement you've given to so many of us. We love you, and we want the very best for you.
Love you too, Shane. Thanks so much for asking. Love you, JoJo. Hug your fam for me.
All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today on this awesome edition of Shop Chat.
Shop Chat. Shop